thank you for this opportunity to talk a little bit about what Wyoming's doing in the digital asset space. I'm very honored to be joined by some great guests on the panel today. And I'm going to introduce each one of them as I ask their first question. So I'm going to start down on the end with Representative Cyrus Western. That is his real name. I know it sounds like a C.J. Box character, but Cyrus Western is a state legislator from Sheridan, Wyoming, another beautiful part of Wyoming. If you've never been there, highly recommend it. So Cyrus has served 6 years in the Wyoming House and has also co-chaired the Select Committee on blockchain. Cyrus, Wyoming has been leading the U.S. in blockchain and digital asset legislation, having passed over 30 pieces of legislation. Tell us a little bit about the work that your committee's been doing and what this legislation means for the folks here.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I think we kind of had to set the stage a little bit here in the sense that, what was the atmosphere like back then? So if we wind the clock back to 2017, 2018, there's a lot of uncertainty across this entire realm, nationally, internationally, the states. Everyone was talking about the bit license out of New York and all that kind of stuff. And there's a handful of legislators, myself included, some who aren't here, and I need to give some credit to them. Chris Rothfuss, Tyler Lindholm, Jared Olson, all these people, Caitlin Long, obviously, who you're all familiar with. We could all kind of sense that there was, there was a real need because there's a lot of uncertainty out there. And I think good regulation sets broad sideboards for everybody to abide by and let the market take care of the rest. And so we knew that there was some type of, there was a license that was needed, this Speedy Bank charter, that if we could do this and do it right and get something really good on the books, that we were going to unlock something that would be really powerful. And in hindsight, we all kind of look back on it and laugh about those days, but it was a real serious fight. I mean, there's a lot of uncertainty. Kind of go through some of the history a little bit. We've worked on 30, 40 pieces of legislation. I'm happy to talk about any of them, but I'd say if you had to pick one that truly unlocked the gates on a lot of this stuff, it was our crypto bank bill, our special purpose depository institution charter. That was the one. It was Senate File 125. It was the general session of 2019. I'm very fortunate. I floor managed the bill on the House side, but there was a whole group of us that had to be and it was a tough slog along the way. If Caitlin's here, she can tell you all about it, but the Uniform Law Commission was really worried about this bill. They were fighting us hard, right? Because obviously, when you start tinkering around with the Uniform Commercial Code, people get really nervous really quickly. And so that was a really big fight, but credit to the folks on that we had in the legislature and the folks on the outside. And, Chris Land, I don't know if he's in the room, he was incredibly instrumental in coming up with a great bill that really struck that balance. And a lot of the areas that make a really good bank charter, whether it's, safety and soundness or any of these types of things that we put in that bill. And as validation, I think for us, the Uniform Law Commission sent us this big nasty letter saying that we're not doing it right, we're going too fast, and all this kind of stuff. We passed Senate File 125, goes through the Senate, goes through the House. Governor Gordon signed it, and he's been an incredible advocate here as well. That bill really kind of unlocked a lot of things, and it was validated by about, I think it was a year later or so that they actually ended up adopting the language that we put on our books, and it was basically an appendix that we mapped to Article 12 of the Uniform Law Commission or our statutes. And so that was really kind of the big piece of legislation that we worked on, I think that really unlocked this. And what we've seen, I mean, going back then, we had zero crypto jobs in the state of Wyoming, or about zero. Now, I mean, we've probably got hundreds at this point, maybe 400 or 500 of good paying jobs that pay well, that have, great health insurance plans, 401k match, all these things that contribute to having really vibrant and successful communities. So, we did a lot of great stuff with DAOs, with DUNAs, the decentralized unincorporated nonprofit associations. I know, Matt has been incredibly instrumental, and really everyone up here has. But I would say if we had to hone in on one piece of legislation that really set the tone, and I think put Wyoming on the map in a big way, it was our crypto bank charter in 2019. So,
yeah, thank you, Cyrus. And immediately to my left, Albert Forkner, who is currently the Chief Risk and Compliance Officer at Two Ocean Trust, but was formerly the Wyoming banking commissioner. Albert served nearly 25 years in the Wyoming Division of Banking, the last 10 of which he was our banking commissioner. And Albert, we just heard about the legislative milestones that Wyoming accomplished in establishing a legal framework. What did the division do as an administrator of those laws to create regulatory clarity in the state?
Right, yeah. So I'd like to thank Cyrus and Caitlin for both completely altering my life. But the legislation, once it was passed, then as the primary regulator for the state, we were tasked to be in the administrator of the law and putting the regulations in place. It was quite the adventure. The timing of it, I don't know if it was coincidental or not, but we spent most of the pandemic coming up with a regulatory and supervisory format while most of you were developing new hobbies, getting pets, and going on vacations. During the pandemic, I was sitting in our conference room on Zoom calls with people from literally around the world. Because what we're trying to do is figure out, how do you administer and supervise a new bank charter? We had not created a new bank charter in this country in decades. And that's what really opened my eyes to just how many brilliant people are in this space. There's still plenty of crazy people too. But we were holding meetings all around the world trying to see, while countries had developed certain aspects of it, it was more around the markets and market integrity, things like that. And New York had the BIT license, but I definitely didn't agree with their approach on how they managed that. So we came up with the regulation, gathered a team of experts in all kinds of areas, and the rules were, there weren't any rules other than I had the final veto authority on making sure that we did not have an overly onerous regulatory environment that kept companies from coming here, but also not so open that we had no safety or soundness structure around it. And we did that, and then we worked on an examination manual. And I think that was really what launched Wyoming again in the bank regulation space. There's an agency, small, but was trying to do it thoughtfully. I know I had plenty of stares where I was either sitting in front of the board of governors or my other colleagues around the state or the country, wondering, like, what are you talking about? And fast forward to today, and you're seeing a number of states use Wyoming as an example of how to implement a regulatory and supervisory framework and taking it from our base to the next level. So it was a long 3-4 years, but I think we really did some groundbreaking work there.
Yeah, indeed. So shifting from the public sector now to the private sector, Matt Kaufman, who's a partner at Hathaway and Kunz, it's a law firm based here in Wyoming, and for the past decade, Matt and his firm have been at the forefront of developing a lot of the innovative legal and policy solutions for digital assets in Wyoming. So Matt has advised a lot of companies who are coming to Wyoming. And so on that, Matt, in the context of this legislative and regulatory framework that's been created, what are you seeing in terms of companies coming to Wyoming, and what is it about Wyoming that's attracting companies?
Yeah, thanks, Joel. So I kind of think about it, I think, in a few different buckets. One is obviously the regulated entities, the SPDIs and the chartered trust companies. There's no question that there's a draw for companies that want to play in the regulated space to work with a regulator that likes them, and understands them and is welcoming to them. So that's been a major driver. Another driver I don't think is talked about very much is most people don't know that Wyoming has created a statutory framework that actually defines digital assets. And it defines it in one of 3 different categorical buckets. And that framework is built into and appended to our UCC. It's baked into many of our corporate statutes. And so we see a big driver for a lot of companies that want to domicile in Wyoming, having those statutory rights remedies surrounding digital assets being native in the statute, right? A lot of people, of course, have done great things with creating definitional structures for rights and remedies in contract, but to have that baked into a statute is incredibly unique. So that's been a big driver. Cyrus mentioned it, but we were the first state to create a DAO LLC, which I would say initially was a driver, although we all know that's not the be-all end-all solution to most of the securities and tax problems that DAOs face. So as of July 1, here just last month, the most recent piece of legislation went effective, and that's the DUNA, the Decentralized Unincorporated Nonprofit Association, which is already an amazing driver. And I'm even willing to say I way underestimated, I think, the attraction that the statute's going to have for the state, namely because a lot of the protocol level projects are realizing there's ways to do this outside of a foundation model where you can actually have this unincorporated structure that is recognized by a state. You're probably, outside of the FinCEN reporting requirements, and it can still maintain a nonprofit status. So pretty cool. We like to give homage to Senator Lummis because she was actually a legislator in Wyoming when the original UNA statute was passed, and now we have the DUNA statute. So that's pretty cool. And then the very last, I think, bucket that I would say is we just see a tremendous influx in Wyoming of corporate clients, and to some extent individuals as well, but who are really wanting to take advantage of the protections that Wyoming has passed surrounding digital assets. Again, we have a lien cleansing provision in our Wyoming statute. If you hold digital assets in Wyoming for a period of time and there's no knowledge of prior lien claims, you actually cleanse of prior liens, which is pretty unique. We have privacy protections with respect to private keys, where courts can't compel the production of private keys. So again, you start to put all of this together, and we have a lot of corporate entities and individuals who just want to package that together and take advantage as much as they can of those protections.
Thanks, Matt. So we're going to shift the discussion from a corporate level to a private client level. Elise McGee, who is a partner with McDermott, Will & Emery, and Elise advises high net worth individuals, families, business owners on all aspects of wealth transfer planning, including cryptocurrency planning. So Elise, for individuals here who hold substantial digital assets, what are the benefits of managing those assets here in Wyoming?
Well, honestly, I'd love to talk about this, and I could go on forever, right? Because there are a lot of benefits that we see that Wyoming brings for everyone sitting in this audience. Estate planning impacts everyone, whether you're a founder, whether you're an individual, you might have a little bit of crypto, you might not have any crypto. And so when you're looking at and thinking about, well, how does this impact me? What am I going to do with my personal assets? And how do I think about wealth, generational wealth transfer, et cetera? Like, look at Wyoming. Why? It's very flexible. We've talked about the great laws that are in place with respect to digital assets. That is also true of trusts and trust law. And these two regimes speak together very well. Right? We have a legislature who is very thoughtful in enacting laws that are going to really attract business to the state from people that even might not live in the state. We can talk about that. But privacy, Matt mentioned this. We can set up a trust that's called a silent trust, where your beneficiaries don't need to receive notice of that trust and existence of that trust. Very powerful. Not every state has that. Very few. Some states require you to give notice to beneficiaries that the trust exists, and that might not be desirable if you have a large concentration of digital assets in that trust for privacy or security reasons or otherwise. Perpetual trusts. We can set up a long-term trust. It can last many, many generations. Or, you don't need to. You have a lot of flexibility in how you build this. Modifications to trusts. Some states require you to have to go into court, or you need all this, there's a lot of different parties. That means that kind of equals expense, legal fees, a lot of process around it. Wyoming is very flexible in how it allows grantors, people that set up the trust, beneficiaries to interact with those estate planning techniques. So, there's a lot of other.
Yeah, and I think at least the folks here in the audience, this may be an underappreciated point, but individuals do not need to be Wyoming residents in order to avail themselves to these advantages. So what are you seeing in terms of your clients who have substantial assets, whether digital or otherwise, who have succession planning needs or tax planning needs?
Yeah, so you heard me talk a little bit, but you're thinking, well, does this impact me because I live in New York? I live in Florida. I live in whatever other state. And the answer is yes. You can live in another state and opt into another jurisdiction's law. And so this is a lot of individuals, particularly those in high tax states, are saying, can I set up a trust and minimize my state tax burden if I have a liquidity event coming? And by opting into Wyoming, a zero tax state, and allowing and basically have that trust be a resident of Wyoming as opposed to a resident of California. And so this is just a very powerful tool. There are a lot of individuals that are thinking in this sophisticated way. They're thinking about creditor protection. They're thinking about, like, how can I bundle all the tax planning with the creditor protection, with everything else? And I'm just here to say very briefly that Wyoming, you can accomplish that. All those just different objectives, and you have a lot of flexibility as a person doing planning in the state as to which levers you pull and how you set it up in a way that works for you and for many generations, for your kids and others.
Your colleague Joe Evans at McDermott Will and Emery helped Cyrus's committee draft and eventually pass legislation that the governor signed into effect July 1st regarding clarification in the event of bankruptcy. Would you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's been a lot of, this is not coming as news to this audience, but a lot of bankruptcies in the crypto area, right, where clients have been surprised to find that they thought that their assets were protected. And it come to find out that maybe those digital assets are being swept up in the bankruptcy estate of the service provider. So Wyoming has put some nice legislation in place that allows financial institutions, trust companies, speedies to specifically exclude client assets from that bank, have them be bankruptcy remote. They won't get sucked into a bankruptcy proceeding. They belong to the customer, the end user, and that's very new legislation. We expect a lot of other states will copycat it because it's just such a powerful tool for individuals seeking that protection.
Yeah, and building on that, and moving back to the corporate side, Matt, what are you seeing in terms of trends and momentum around the legal and regulatory front in Wyoming?
Well, people laugh at me when I say this, but there's in my world, there's a mass exodus from Delaware to Wyoming. Everyone is kind of mad at Delaware for a lot of reasons right now. Most people don't know Wyoming is actually number 2 in the nation behind Delaware in annual corporate filings. So it's a popular domicile, but when you combine sort of the privacy orientation of Wyoming's statutory structure with its, super friendly corporate structure, LLC structure, all the partnership structures, and then you layer on top of that all these digital asset rights remedies that we were talking about, that many of which are baked into the corporate structures and enabled in that way. It's pretty interesting. And the last one I have to mention, actually, which goes largely unnoticed by corporate attorneys across the U.S., but Wyoming has the fastest chancery court in the country now. There is no court that is as fast as Wyoming's. And so what we're seeing is a tremendous attraction from corporate attorneys, from venture capital groups. I was just sharing backstage, actually, that a couple of the VCs I routinely work with are actually now requiring their digital asset portfolio companies to domicile in Wyoming because of all of these things that we're talking about. Again, having that sort of foundational rights and remedies associated with digital asset and the property classifications baked into a statute. On top of that, having a chancery court that's hyper fast with judges that have experience now with digital assets. It's kind of starting to look like a home court for digital asset companies. So I'm super bullish on that trend long term. And again, when you layer onto that all of the friendly aspects we have for just corporations in general and individual rights and privacy, it's becoming very attractive.
Albert, building on that, as a former banking commissioner, for the companies in the digital asset space who are thinking about Wyoming, what should they keep top of mind when launching new services or new products?
Exactly. I think a lot of us, especially if you're a participant in the space, you hear the term, no surprises with your regulator, go in and speak with them early and often. And so, yes, I agree with that. But I think not necessarily to just seek permission, but one thing that, and I'm not speaking for the current administration, although the commissioner worked for me for about 10 years, so I think you probably share some of the similar thoughts, is that it's the conversations that these companies have, either thinking of formation or, again, launching a product or service, is working collaboratively with a regulator, assuming the regulator wants to find solutions. And sometimes the answer is no, you can't. But I think what I tried to do and have my staff do in working with the industry was, we were learning and trying to gather. So one, come educate me on what you're wanting to do and why you're wanting to do it. And then let's talk about how you do that in a safe and sound manner, and see if it fits within the existing framework, legislative or regulatory. And I think we can all agree that that part of it is lagging, and will probably continue to lag because of the development in the industry. You can't keep up with it, and we're seeing that friction day after day after day at both state and federal level. But I know the companies that we talked with early on that ultimately got their charters for the SPDI, and trust companies that were in the digital asset space, they had a lot of thought-provoking questions for us, and sometimes we all agreed that the law doesn't contemplate it. Let's see if we can do this. And it wasn't just bowing to industry demands. It was actually saying, I agree, there's a problem here. There's a conflict in the language, or it's not clear. And the benefit we had in Wyoming being, we used to say we're a small state, but very nimble state, is we maintained a good relationship with the legislature, with, the select committee, and saying, hey, here's why we want to do this. Here's why this legislative proposal makes sense, and let's work together. And it kind of functions somewhat as a public-private cooperation. And we also were able to advocate at the national level. I had conversations with all of the agencies, and what you hear, I can tell you on the front page, is much different than we had in conversations, behind closed doors, because they were doing it, again, this is 2019, 2020, trying to figure out answers as well, and realizing that the federal solution is going to take a long time. And so let's do something at the state level. And so some of them are actually speaking here over the next 2 days that were helpful and engaging. And so the regulator can act as an advocate, I think, sometimes, but also a control valve, if you will, that so those conversations are very important and helpful, I think, hopefully, for both parties involved.
Yeah, that's great. Cyrus, we've talked about Senate File 125, which clarified digital assets in our commercial and property laws. We've talked about the DAO, the DUNA, the Speedy Bank charter. We haven't hit on the Wyoming stable token yet, which our governor, Mark Gordon, will be here tomorrow morning back on the stage, and we'll talk a little bit about it then. But give us a little bit of a sense of what was behind the committee's view on this creation of the first publicly issued stable token, as we're calling it, stable coin. Wyoming's calling it a stable token.
Yeah. I think history is replete with examples of this, whether it's in the corporate world or in this digital asset world. And I think just throughout world history, you don't achieve big things by being modest. The people who really do the cool stuff in this world, who build cool companies and platforms, you name it, they get out there and they swing hard. And, if you just kind of look at the general atmosphere in the market, we kind of looked and said, hey, we have an opportunity here. I think the state of Wyoming has built a really good reputation amongst those who know in this space as being very fair-minded, wanting to regulate to enable, not regulate to restrict. And we kind of wanted to continue down that path and do something that no state has done, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of these stable tokens being issued, whether it was Circle or obviously all the ones that you're all very familiar with, but there hasn't been one that's been issued by a state. And so that was really the idea at a big picture level, is how do we do something bold and daring, and how do we enter action with boldness? And that was the driving thought process behind the committee and a lot of the discussions that we had. As you are all intimately familiar with, issuing these things, it's not a walk in the park. There are a lot of technical details. You know, the director of our commissioners here, Paul, and he's worked his keister off on this stuff. But there's a lot of those details that we're working through right now. But that was at the high level was we really wanted to do something very bold and put our reputation as a state that is friendly to this asset class, whether it's the stable token space, the digital banking space, the blockchain technologies across the board. We really wanted to do something big, and I think we're well on our way to doing just that. So
yeah, maybe expand on that, Cyrus, if you would. Why is Wyoming involved in the digital asset space to begin with? What is it about Wyoming that is driving us to want to lead?
So Joel did something very dangerous, and that's give a politician an open-ended question. Before I go down that path, I want to give a shout out to Albert Forkner. He was the banking regulator when all this stuff was going on. And as you all know, working with banking regulators can be a tedious process, but not with him. He was one who was very receptive. I mean, he pushed back when he needed to, and there was plenty that natural debate and discussion. But he was incredible to work with, and I really appreciate just all of his effort and helping get this stuff done. It could not be done without him. But Joel, to answer your question, I want to take us back to the year 1820, and a man named Joe Meek, who was probably the first non-native person to enter the Yellowstone caldera, caressed Togety Pass just north of here, about 40, 50 miles down to the caldera. And what he saw changed his life forever. And what he reported back to all these trading posts along the Missouri River and all these other trading posts on the story of the West changed the West forever. And it kind of set forth in motion the way of Wyoming and our legacy and the people that came after him. They had to live these incredibly tough lives where they did not have the government there to save them, right? You got to, if you survived and you made it to your own grit, to surviving incredibly brutal winters, right? And I think that set forth a mentality, a mindset, I think a culture that we have embraced in Wyoming ever since then, is that if we want to do cool stuff, no one's going to hand it to us. We got to go out there and earn everything. And I think we've carried that tradition forward in a great way, and we've been first many times, right? I mean, the Louisa Swain casting her vote in Laramie, Wyoming, was the first woman to ever vote in the Western Hemisphere. I mean, that's an incredible legacy that we have. And kind of tying it obviously to this kind of stuff. I mean, the Limited Liability Company Act of 1973, that was a big deal back then. I mean, we all take LLCs for granted here in this room and in the West, really, but back then that was a big idea. You know what Senator Lummis did with some of her work with some of these incorporation options back in the 90s. And so I really think this is just the next iteration, the next chapter, and I think in a legacy that we're very, very proud of here in Wyoming. So,
well, thank you. I want to take a moment to thank you all for coming to Wyoming. Those of you that have traveled here, I've talked to a lot of you, and I know it's for the first time, but we're grateful for you all to be here. We're grateful to Anthony and Joe and John and the rest of the team at SALT for putting this together, and for Kraken and the University of Wyoming for sponsoring as well. And if you could all join me, please, in thanking Cyrus, Elise, our former banking commissioner, who used to say to us that he's not happy until you're not happy. But now he's reformed in the private sector, but has been really important for all that's been done here at the state. And of course, Matt Kaufman. Thank you all.